Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Pledge Pros podcast, a podcast dedicated to unmatched value and unwavering support for our customers and community at large. Today, we have JD Solomon. He really doesn't need an introduction, but I'll give a little bit in the background. He's got 30 plus years in the maintenance, engineering, construction industry. He comes from a long line of maintenance, engineering, and tradesmen in his family. He's got an engineering degree, a master's of finance. He's a CRE, a CMRP, a Lean Six Sigma black belt. Um, and he's an absolute crusher in the industry. Most people listening will know who he is. And he is all things maintenance, reliability, big picture standpoint, finance, communication, which we're going to talk about a lot today. It's going to be great. JD, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Great to be here, Bryan.
Thank you.
Great to
Thank you. We're very glad to have you. JD and I met at SMRP, like many people that I meet. We meet at SMRP, and we've been playing tag a little bit to connect and get set up here. But JD is going to he's going to be an ambassador for Upkeep. He brings a wealth of knowledge, and today we want to talk about his experience, his background, and then touch a little bit about maintenance communication, maintenance leadership, and finance. So JD, before we get into all that, tell us a little bit about who you are, and ultimately where you are today.
Yeah, let me say first, really appreciate what you guys are doing at Upkeep. It's a great product, but you guys are taking it to the next level, trying to match your customers with experts like myself. And of course, your time and expertise, Bryan, is phenomenal. So to have you leading this, really, really, really appreciate it.
We appreciate that. We're all about that customer support, man. We are hyper focused on unmatched support, and we believe that there is a massive separation within the CMMS space when it comes to support. You can know everything about your platform, right? And that only gets people so far. But connecting them to industry, connecting them to experts, industry experts such as yourself, that's where we can really drive long-term value. So I'll shut up. Go ahead, man.
My 25-cent tour. My grandfather, my mother's father, was a head mechanic at a Dodge dealership, big 6 bay garage. Grew up on his knee watching NASCAR and working on cars and all
Nice.
that kind of thing from a maintenance perspective. My dad left the family line and went to work for a big power company, and so he was in the design engineering field. So I got to watch him do that and do that as an intern as I went through college. And then his best friend, who they up and moved together to Charlotte, big city, right? He was a developer and became a big business owner, developer. So that's kind of where I learned construction and operations from. But that's always been part of my background. And for good or bad, I get thrown into those situations where different groups don't really talk to each other. I'm the guy that's supposed to speak the language.
Right. It's
So
it's massively important. You know, you and I talking before coming on, even in phone conversations we've had, um, what you do and the value and the service you provide to your customers is something that is severely lacking in our industry. Um, and it's the ability to communicate. It's the ability to communicate up and down the chain of command, the ability to communicate value, the ability to communicate to get capital expenditures. You know, you like you and I said, you may be right and you may have the right answer, but that doesn't always matter. It's how do you connect and communicate the right answer with the right person, right? So touching on that just a little bit, what are when it comes to communication, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to finance, when you're working with customers and helping them build holistic programs, holistic understanding, and bridging all the gaps between all these departments, because ultimately the departments within a business, if it's operating well, and I'm not going to say that I've made this happen or anything, right? But they're generally they're together, right? They're making decisions relatively in cohesion with each other, because there's a common understanding that we all need each other and one is going to affect the other and vice versa. Can you speak to that a little bit?
yeah, and I'd say most organizations are trying to do that, right?
Right, right.
But when you get below the CEO or the COO, a lot of times it breaks down into its different silos pretty quickly. And then you see all those different interests coming into play. One of the things is we talk and teach and train communication up the line is that you've got to look at that whole inner circle, because when senior management's making big decisions, to your point, they're trying to do it together, and so that chief decision maker has trusted advisors. It's not always important that you touch the senior executive as long as you touch the senior advisors that they're listening to.
Right.
And so it's much more of at a really operational level where I've spent a lot of my career, it gets to be how do you just influence the guy working beside you? But as you go up the line with your communication, you've really got to appreciate that body that sits up there. There's still one decision maker, but
Sure.
that one decision maker has confidants, an inner circle that they're listening to. You've got to pierce that inner circle too.
Right. And do you find, if someone listening is working at a lower level, right? Say they're a maintenance supervisor or a team lead or a planner or something like that. Do you find that um, their ability to garner cohesion with their peers, so like mechanics and things, if they build a big enough groupthink, if you will, with some results, do you find that those people have a better chance of getting what they need or doing the things they need to do as they work their communication upward?
They do, as long as they appreciate that need as they go up. True to what you say, everybody, if you're good at this level and you have empathy and you're listening and you can communicate, you can transfer that up. What I often see though in the trainings we do and a lot of the workshops we do is what you equate at this level is not necessarily what you equate this way. We
Sure.
tend to look at the big boss and say, I've got to pierce that person. What I'll often try to teach people is if you can get to know the person beside them, make your pitch there, and
Yeah.
that person may seal the deal for you without you even having to get to know the big boss.
Right.
And so there's an approach you've got to take that sometimes is lost as we get nervous and try to communicate up, and we
Sure.
lose that appreciation for what we do around us.
Right. And it's funny when you say that. I always think back to my time as being a director of maintenance manager, and being a person who was always wanted to drive fundamental excellence, and I've failed at it and I've succeeded at it, right? But I always would be thinking like, who do I need to bother? Who do I whose seed do I need to plant? Like who am I
Right.
going to find and help me carry
Yeah.
my message to the appropriate people? And I find that connecting them to my goal and how it plays out for them with benefit has helped propagate that message, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, yeah.
do you find that as well?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And the best people at communicating are the people that do exactly what you've done. They've kind of got those people when they don't need them and got them engaged in what they're doing. And then when you do need them, they're there to reinforce you and to do that.
Right.
And so it's much more about getting those people bought in to what you're doing. Um, and it's a mystery to people that fail at it is how did Bryan do that? Well, Bryan did that because he's been working on it for 6 months, building
Yes.
that relationship, and getting somebody bought into what he's doing in advance, right?
Yeah. And you're not always going to win. That's something to understand too, is um like I said, I've failed at it. I know a lot of people, you've probably in your own coming up, you've had the struggle. You're like, man, how the heck do I get to this person? What do I got to do here? Right. And it doesn't work out. And sometimes the leadership is on a different path. And sometimes it's so hard to align yourself with them that it might not happen. Um,
Yeah,
but
and I've worked on both sides of that, Brian. So I see it. I served at one point in my career. I was an interim town manager, right? And I tell this story about my guys, my O&M guys in the operation found $60,000 of waste,
oh my
and they
goodness,
came to me and they said, "Hey, you're one of us. You're here now in the big chair. We can clean this up. Let's clean it up." And I was like, "No, I'm not going to do that." And they were like, "What's wrong with you? You don't understand. Are you stupid? Have you sold us out? What's wrong with you?" And it was not that. It was just I had bigger problems.
sure,
They reached me, and I was going to do something about it, but I just couldn't do something about it on their timeline.
right,
And I
right.
think that's one of the things we teach is don't think no is a forever no. It may just be the timing's off with your executive.
Right. And I've certainly heard that as well. And, um, thinking about leadership and those types of things, they're also, and correct me if I'm wrong, it shows that they're sometimes looking through a different lens than you, right? They view the business very differently than you do. So if I'm a field mechanic and I'm working in the field every single day, I'm I'm the face of the business, right? I'm working on customer machine, I'm creating value, whatever, but I'm not necessarily seeing what's behind all of that, right? And what it
Right.
takes to support all of that. And the leadership is looking at all of these things and trying to make informed decisions about things collectively. Um, and would you say that uh, sometimes it takes helping the leadership to view through the lens of the people that work for them?
Yes, it does. I usually talk about three different parts of this, and I'll start with the first one because we are technical people, right? We're craft
Sure.
people, trade people, we're engineers, we're technicians, we're whatever. We've got to be true to our data first and our information. So you can't go out and lie just because somebody wants to hear what you want to hear. That's what salesmen do, and we
Yeah.
expect that out of politicians, right?
Oh,
But not out of
100%.
trusted advisors, right? So you've
Right.
got to be true to the data, um, and but after that, you've got to think like your decision making things. You can't think like you. To your point, right? And so if they think in terms of dollars or in terms of timing, in terms of how it impacts other big decisions, you've got to have that empathy to get in with them and say, yeah, I'm going to be first true to the information, but then next I've really got to be empathetic to you,
Right.
not to me. So those are two of the things that I usually preach as my top three.
Right. I mean, it's extremely valuable. I mean, it's that there's such a there's nuance and it's very dynamic, right? Because every leader, decision makers is different. They have their own personal goals, their own leadership style, their own communication style. So there's really the core of it, if you will, is just that, is to
Yes.
understand, try to put yourself in their shoes, try to look outside of where you are in your role, and try to draw some correlation there. And it reminds me of when, like for us with upkeep, with CMMS and maintenance, and I've dealt with tons of CMMS companies and things, and it's always like you talk to a potential customer and they're like, oh, we're so reactive. We never know when machines are going to be worked on, blah, blah. And you're like, okay, well,
Yeah.
CMMS is something that helps align all those resources so that things are more strategic, right? They go, oh, well, the boss won't, he thinks it's a waste of time. And I'm like, well, what's more of a waste of time? All your downtime, all your miscommunication, all your wasted resources, or some form of structured work management, you know?
Right.
It's just, it's a crazy thing where people, their priorities lie, and I think it's just because they haven't had the opportunity to either communicate or have been communicated to, right, in an effective way.
Right. And a lot of times what we do as decision makers or executives is we pass that communication down to others. And most of the direct reports, if you went to your boss's boss, he'll tell you that only about a third, 25 or 30% of his direct reports are good communicators. Yet almost a dereliction of duty, they tell them to pass it on to their more junior people. And so we really I got crappy, bad training when I started, and probably everybody does to some degree because the odds aren't in your favor. We work in a technical business where most people aren't good communicators, and our bosses don't really get us prepared with good mentors, right?
Right.
To be good communicators. So,
Right.
um, and speaking of CMMS, we do JD Solomon Inc. We do a lot of consulting with CMMS systems, project management systems, billing systems. But that's one of the things that we talk about is how do you take your selection and implementation process and make it well documented so it becomes a good communication tool for you as well.
Sure.
And so a lot of times, as you know, people take a CMMS system and they just kind of buy one and then figure out what they want to do with it later. Done it that way plenty of times. It's just not the best way as far as trying to build a sustainable system.
Right.
You really have to work as a team to communicate what you want and then keep working on expectations as you go.
Right. Yeah.
So many of us miss that.
Oh yeah, the
Um,
discover from discovery to selection of just not even selecting it to use, but selecting a group that match discovery session, the needs of the now business, the needs of the potential future business, right? All of those things come into play. And all of those things, to your point, start at some form of communication. Why do we need this? Why are we even talking about this? Is it being pushed from top to us, or is it us saying, hey, we need this and we're pushing it up organically to leadership to make a decision?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
It's got to be documented, and then it's got to be reviewed. It should be, because we know in a CMMS system, there's going to be successes and there are going to be failures. I don't care how good or bad it is.
right.
You need to remind the team that 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, guys, this is all we were planning on doing. We're
Yep.
exceeding that, right? You gotta celebrate those wins, but you can't do that unless you're really planning for communication.
That's right. And even when I have in the past talked to customers that are thinking about switching a CMMS, and they already have one, they're thinking about switching it. Or, they don't necessarily are utilizing it correctly and seeing the value, and they think that something's wrong with the system. But you quickly find it's not the system, right?
No.
It's the way in which we interact with the system and the way that the value of the system is documented, communicated, and used to drive value. And often you find that a guy wrote a check for some CMMS, he's got no clue really what it does. And then
Yep.
compounding that, you have a team that maybe didn't do the appropriate selection discovery, and there's no champion to keep it sustainable, and keeping it,
Yep.
maintained with the work management. So there's no communication. It's like, I spent this money, you did this, it's not working. It's like, well, we haven't even talked to each other about this.
We haven't even defined what the outcomes need to be, right?
Yeah, exactly,
And,
exactly.
and the whole thing about switching CMMS is like my golf club, right? I mean, I can go buy a new driver, and I keep saying those drivers don't work very well, but it's
Uh-huh.
got nothing to do with the driver. It's got everything to do with my process and my swing and
Yeah,
my ability to take instructions or to give instructions to my coach. You try to make me better.
yeah,
I
yeah.
do that with baseball bats too, right? And, I coach baseball kids, and those kids all want $300 or $400 bats, and you go, guys, I don't think the bat's going to make that big a difference whether you're a good hitter for average or not.
It's so true. I talk to people. I do a lot of service work, and I talk to people about like multimeters. And I use a Fluke, 117, which is a tradesman's Fluke multimeter. It does pulse width modulation and everything I needed to do. And then I see other people like, this is the best multimeter in the whole world. It's got wireless. It's got a billion functions. It was $1,000, and I'm like, you're an apprentice.
Yeah. Cool.
We
Right.
need we need that for, right? The mismatch of priorities
Yeah.
and what is actually needed from the product, and that's going to be used. Um, so I
I've
want
got a
to.
Fleur. You mentioned Fluke. I've got a Fleur E4 thermographic camera that I've had for 8 or 9 years now, and it does everything I needed. I selected it for that reason, but I still get people now say, "Oh, you just got an E4. You need something more powerful. Do you have this module?" No, man. I'm out doing a lot of screenings and a lot of just spot checks.
Yep.
I'm not the main electrician trying to run this stuff on a PDM program.
Right. That's
And
right.
so I've got the right tool for the job. And with CMMSs, we often don't, as we were saying, we don't sit down and map out what's the right tool for the job. And then we don't communicate it as in a succession plan, right? Because
Right.
again, staff comes and goes. I mean, everybody changes roles every 3 to 5 years in
That's
most
right.
organizations. So if you don't have it documented or you don't have it explained very well, people forget why you even bought the
Yeah.
CMMS
Exactly.
to start with, or whatever the instrument is, right?
Right. And touching on something you said a little earlier, about modeling your communication to the appropriate stakeholder. Um, like you said, we're technical people, right? We've been in leadership roles, and we've been fortunate enough to navigate those things and drive some success from that. But a lot of leadership doesn't really understand what you do, right? They understand the impact of what you do to the bigger business, but they don't actually know the day to day of what you do, what your team does. And in a theory, they don't have to, right? Because you should be relying on leadership, progressive leadership down the chain to communicate and create all those things, right? But when you come to communicating, putting things in terms of value for the optics of that person or the lens that that person looks through has been massively successful for me. And I know it's something that you teach as well. It's like, if you're talking to finance, you need to talk about bookkeeping, record keeping, where's the money going? Where's it coming from? Are things orderly? When you're talking to safety, we want to talk about mitigating risk, and reducing incidents. When we're talking to operations, we want to put things in terms of downtime and potential standby labor costs and all this stuff. When you're talking to the big boss, you're saying, hey, it's waste, and waste equates to money, right? Whether it's risk, whether it's parts, whether it's manpower waste, it's risk and waste, and it all equates to money. So what are your thoughts on changing your language to align with the stakeholder?
Well, the universal language of business is money, right? So you've really got to be able to talk about the benefit cost and the payback, and why does this make sense for what we're doing. And the big bosses are going to say, well, what does it do for morale? Well, that's a cost of that too, right? If
Sure.
you've got bad morale or people are redoing their work all the time, you're going to lose people and have turnover. So you can also talk about the soft part of the cost, right?
Sure.
But distinguish between the long term and the world's going to end, in the long term. Probably not everybody's going to quit, but there are some softer pain parts. But what executive management really wants to hear you talk about is, how does this help the bottom line? How does this help the operating budget? How does it help profitability? How does it make us work smarter, not harder? And that's all in dollars.
Right.
And a lot of folks get frustrated with that because they said it should be about. And remember, I went to engineering school too, so they teach as an engineer, don't do anything based on cost. Just design the right thing, and it costs what it costs.
I wish the
No,
world was like that.
the world is not like that. That's exactly right. And when I work with engineers, a lot of them crash and burn because
Yeah.
they can't appreciate that doing it right is being taken for granted by the
Sure.
people. Like you said, Brian, they don't understand what you do, but they expect you to do it right.
That's right.
And then beyond that, it becomes, how does this make financial sense for me, organizational sense for me? You need to make your case at that level.
Right.
And I do a lot of, again, two companies here, but the JD Solomon Inc. does a lot of work with business cases. That's really where I work with a lot of the O&M staff and the engineering staff of, how do I make the business case to get what I want?
Right.
And so that's really what that is about over there, that part of the company.
I like your example of engineering, and I'm not an engineer. I did not go to engineering school. I've had engineers work for me. I've done a lot of stuff with engineers, and I trust them to do what they're experts to do, right? And it's funny you say that in engineering school you're trained to do it right. Don't think about the cost, and it makes me think about how reliability is a byproduct of design. And
Yes.
if if we did what you said, maintenance and reliability people would have a lot easier job, right? Because we wouldn't be documenting all of these failure mechanisms, failure modes, and saying, hey, we need to change the design, we need to retrofit, we need capital expenditure to change, modify, and update. A lot of that would be less. So we'd be like, oh, cool. Let's just maintain machines to their design characteristics and
Yes.
capacities, and we wouldn't have to be doing all these changes.
No. And if you pick the right machine and do the maintenance, it makes the business case for you. It
That's right.
really, really does.
Yep.
Now back to your executive. Sometimes you've also got to be with empathy. If they're going through a merger, or the company's been losing money for 3 quarters in a row, they're probably not going to make the big long-term decision. So you've
Yeah.
got to kind of factor that into your thinking when you make your pitch.
Sure.
But all things being equal, they are going to look at the long-term value, but you've got to also show that short-term
Sure.
benefit somehow. So,
Yeah, and I've been the maintenance leader for a company that was a startup. It had a crazy amount of growth, and that growth kind of tapered off. So while I was building the program, the communication and value was easier to communicate because you're communicating to people that have money to spend, and they can see the long-term value. But when things start to go downhill a little bit, your arguments, not arguments, your communication for needed things have to be very strategic, right? And I aligned myself with key stakeholders within the business to ensure that what I was trying to achieve was also in their best interest. So that when I went to make these pitches and these communications, other people were speaking on my behalf as well.
Right. And that gets back to the empathy again, yourself in their positions, and maybe patience a little bit too. We teach that too.
Sure.
Um, just to be patient in the decision. I have a lot of people in the trainings we do and the workshops we do come up and say, I just work in a company now where we're under stress and nobody wants to invest in, you name it, reliability, quality, risk management activities. And sometimes they don't like my answer because my answer is it seems like you're doing everything right, but the company context may be not right for the big program you want. So
Yeah,
either you've got to be patient or either you got to leave. And you don't want to hear leaving, but sometimes the context of the company doesn't match what you want to do.
that's right.
And you go, people bang their heads all the time trying to change people and change companies. You're probably not going to change it very fast.
Right. You
A
know,
company, it's a long game, right?
yeah, it is. And that reminds me of, George Williams, friend of
Oh yeah,
ours,
reliability X. Yep.
great guy. And he said to me one time, he said, we don't, when we help customers, we don't try to change them. We try to evolve them. And it's true to what you said. And that word is, I think, is a smart word to use because evolution is a time-based thing. It's not like, hey, we're here and we're changing everything you're doing right now.
Right.
People don't like to hear that,
No,
you know?
no, they won't. They'll run you off if they do it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think there's a disconnect with the JD Solomon Inc. consulting part of my world. Um, that's what we try to do. We're a lot more staff augmentation and going there side by side with somebody and let's improve your preventive maintenance program.
Yeah.
Let's look at your interfaces of your scene. Let's not do a training. Nothing wrong with training. We do some training too. But most of what we do is working side by side to solve problems, which
Right.
means we have to get into the company's context, right?
Yes.
And so if you're not in their context, they're not going to change, and they're probably not going to change much anyway. They most companies, having sat on that side, and you have too, they want their consultants or their contractors to come in and fix a problem,
Sure.
not change them forever. They're not there for a change management course, right?
Oh yeah, I've had some
It could
rough
happen, but
conversations.
that's not what they're hiring you, right? That's not what they're hiring.
Yeah, and I've had some rough conversations too because they definitely don't like to hear sometimes when you go in and you become a part of the business, right? And you're
Oh
there,
yeah,
you become a part of the business, you start to really see what's happening from culture, from manpower, to find like, all the things that make up an appropriate business. And I've had conversations with people where I tell them what everyone else has been telling them, to a
yeah,
point, and they don't, they don't like that. They're like, this is the problem. We spend too much money on spare parts. And I go, I understand that, but it starts over there. It's not the part spending that's the problem. It's the process that lead up to a guy touching a part. And that
that's exactly
process
right.
needs to be corrected. You know, it's funny. It's funny. It's all the same, right?
It is the same. It's just different. You talked about the stovepipes. Every stovepipe in the organization has the same kind of problems because it comes down to people and processes and their tools, right?
Yes.
Um, it's just how we go in there. A lot of what I do is look at those different parts and try to make them work together. It's more of a systems thinking kind of thing, right?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and another thing by you doing that, you start to build some real trust and relationships with the people that you're helping, right? It's not viewed, in my opinion, it's not viewed as JD Solomon Inc. business. It's business. JD Solomon Inc. just happens
Yeah.
to
And
be
what
a part of it.
Right, and they will bring us in now to almost interpret things for them. I've got board members and senior executives that just say, "Hey, I got this report. Will you come in here and just read it and tell us what it says?" I'm like, "You've got consultants to tell you what it says," and they go, "No, I need somebody to tell me in our terms what this means for us."
Right.
And I shouldn't be getting paid to do that, but again, it highlights this whole communication thing of you can do the greatest work in the world, but if you can't reach the context and communicate with people, um, it doesn't work.
Right.
But the other side of that is you've also got to be honest about that because I'm not always the best communicator with every person in an organization. I've
Sure.
got people around me that I say maybe it's not me and that person, it's this person and this other person.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. I've got to be humble too as a communicator.
Yeah, that's no doubt. I mean, that's 100% right. We all can't essentially meet the needs of all communication forms for every single person, right?
That's
I
right.
know, I know if you were to ask people that worked with me in the past, they'd say that I'm aggressive, not meaning mean aggressive, but aggressive in pursuit of like, let's get this done, right? And there were certain people that I could communicate with and click well with that we had this like a common, I don't even know what you call it, right? A common understanding, whatever. But most of the time, those people were people who had maybe been in my shoes or they had been a part of something that I'm trying to do or communicate, right? That always helped, but it wasn't always the case. Um, and then you had people who were just like, I can't talk to this person. You got to talk to this person because it's just different, right?
Yeah. And I use the word old school word, but I use rapport, right?
Yeah,
And rapport is trust and respect.
sure.
And so on one hand, they got to trust what you're saying and believe in you. And for some reasons, some people just don't like the way you look or talk or something. They don't trust you, but they
Yeah,
also have to respect you. And then that rapport is where you build it. So a lot of what we're talking about in communication is how do I build rapport where a person both we trust and respect each other.
right,
And
right,
so, and that's why you have to have a. That's another thing we haven't talked about, but just you have to have an approach. It's not enough just to go to the internet and go off and pull a bunch of communication tips
right,
out of the world. Soft
right.
skills, all soft skills really need an approach. Um, I would say most mechanical and electrical skills need an approach too, right? How you diagnose something, or
Yes,
back to a process or a procedure for diagnosing something. You need the same thing with the soft skills, and that's where a lot of people miss it. They think, I'm going to focus on my hard skills and then pick up these soft skills and one tip at a time. Well, no, that probably doesn't work in anything.
right. Yeah, I
You
mean,
really have to have an approach.
right. The relationship side of it is super important. And I know a lot of people who have found a lot of success, including myself, in just, having an honest conversation and interest in what you're trying to achieve with other people, right? Open and building relationships with people just in general, right? I'm not saying that you just build a relationship with somebody to leverage them and get what you want out of a business, right? But just in general, and you would be surprised at what what you can achieve once you have a collective of people that are all in alignment with what the values are of what you're trying to do from a business standpoint or from a department standpoint or safety or whatever it is. Having that team or that cohesion is just a benchmark for better change, right?
Right. But the way you approach your communication with Ryan Chan may be different than somebody else at Upkeep. Or the
Sure.
way you approach communication with your wife may be different than your son or daughter.
Oh, big
So
time with the
so
wife.
so you're not trying to deceive them. You're not trying to manipulate them or
Sure.
persuade them per se, because you don't want people doing that to you either. What you're really doing is try to figure out an approach to have that rapport, that relationship where I'm just going to say certain things at certain times in certain ways with this person, and I may approach it a little different with that person.
Right.
But it's the same story, back to the same data, the same information. You're not manipulating people. You're just building a relationship and a rapport that
Right.
enables you to communicate.
Yeah, no doubt. Um, JD, one last thing. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your books that you've written about this topic?
Yeah. So that's a lot of where I'm. Give you the long story on the business. Almost 4.5 years ago, I started my own company before COVID. Right, George Williams and I do have that in common. Right, you start a company after being in the Fortune 500 for almost 2 decades, and then COVID hits you a year later or within a year. Um, but one of the things that JD Solomon does is the consulting side and the hands-on with the CMMS and the maintenance and reliability and the asset management. That's what we do. What I was finding was some of the training and communication stuff, and to the comment about the books and other things I do, nobody on this side that works for me wants to see me blend all that together necessarily because it gets in the way. And
That's
so
right.
I broke the two companies off a couple of years ago. And really, the communicating with finesse and where I do my books is over in that communicating with finesse umbrella, which is really a community, kind of like you're building here, a community of professionals that are committed to
Sure.
making people better communicators and facilitators. So the first book is, and it's in its second edition, is communicating to decision makers. That's communicating reliability, risk,
Love it.
resiliency to decision makers. So
Love it.
that's all about the vertical communication. How do we get to the boss's boss and get the boss's boss? The second book I wrote is about how do we, as we're enlisted as technical specialists, to lead these teams, whether we're doing RCA or FMEA or a master plan, whatever we're doing, we've got to work side to side with our peers.
Right.
And so facilitating with finesse is how we as technical professionals become the guiders of the collaboration. And that's a little different approach than the vertical piece in the first book.
Sure.
And so one kind of covers us up and down, and one kind of covers us side to side.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's super important, and it's something that, we'll say it again. It's just it's a disconnect that a lot of maintenance people have, a lot of technical people have. It's because that's not what they do, right? It's you hire a design engineer to build you a widget. That's what they're good at doing. They're not good
Yes.
at they're not good. They're not going to be the guy who's like, oh, I can build the widget, finance the widget, communicate the widget, lead the widget. That's not the person that you've hired to do. But that person, as they grow and they branch out in their career, there may be opportunities where they need to know the things that we're talking about. And your books are a testament to helping people understand those things, to whichever way they're going, facilitation or to communicating the vertical, right?
And the finesse, when you hear me talk about finesse, that's those seven, and that's kind of research based, but that's a cause and effect relationship. So do
Okay.
those seven well, or at least within tolerance, like any system, and you'll have good communication.
Right.
The cater that we talk about in community in the facilitation is much more five kind of things you remember to be a great facilitator. It's not cause and effect. There's so much that goes on in the facilitating these different kinds of things that we facilitate as technical professionals. But I try to make it easy for people who aren't trained in communication or who are trying to learn to have a mental model of finesse or cater, so
Right.
they can kind of remember the 5 or 7 things they need to do.
No
And
doubt.
that's proven really, really effective over the years as we've kind of implemented this.
Yeah. It's a very similar model to what Upkeep started as, and it's how do I make work management easy and accessible, right? It's one thing if it's easy but not accessible, and it's another thing if it's accessible but it's not easy, you know. And that's very similar to what Upkeep has done, is say, hey, where are technicians at? They're not in an office, they're in a field, they're in the field working, right? Do you want to have the delta and potential variance of information from them commuting and doing their day to day, going back and forth, putting this information in, or do you want them to have it in the most important thing in their life, which is, their phone? And do you want it to
The
be
phone
easy?
with a pull down menu, right? That's where
Yeah,
they need it, right? It doesn't need to be
easy.
any more complicated than that, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. So JD, one last thing, man. How do we get a hold of you, other than, we're going to have you on our ambassador page, things like that, but how can we get a hold of you?
The easiest ways are still traditional websites, jdsolomonsolutions.com, all those in Solomon, and communicatingwithfinesse.com.
Love it.
They're long strings, but they're easy to remember because they're long strings, right? They're
Yeah,
what we do.
right.
And so that's the best way. And of course, anybody calls me anytime by cell phone. It's on the website, but y'all are welcome to my cell phone as well, as long as you don't.
You're
At some
brave.
point, I'll give you some free advice, right? But I'll start charging at some point because I am a consultant. But anyway,
I can confirm. I called JD and he answered the phone.
I do. I try to. There is an office phone that I don't answer very much, but we have other people that do.
Right on.
But it's fun, and I throw this out there too, Ryan. I do a couple things that I do try to do in addition to some of the training on communicating with finesse. If folks out there have presentations or something they've got to give, um, I charge for that in some cases. But the first time I meet you, if you want to send me some stuff and say, "Hey, JD, what would you give me some tips and pointers?" If they're part of the Upkeep family, I don't mind spending an hour looking through some stuff and giving them some pointers
Sure.
on that. And then as we build relationships with you, I also have some checklists that'll help like you say, you want it to be accessible and easy. I found that just like our normal work, we want to have a checklist. So I've built some checklists that can help some folks too.
That's a huge one. I honestly didn't even think about that until you said it. Is if you're going to make your pitch, right, and you have everything set up how you believe it should go, having someone look at it like yourself would be massively beneficial before you pitch those things, right? Because you can
Yeah.
take you personally can take and assess the audience and who you're going to be talking to and all these things. That's a good one, JD.
Mainly, and again, I'm all right. My mom's proud of me, but I'm not the sharpest guy around. But I have reviewed enough of these presentations for different people, and both written reports and presentations now that I can spot things fairly easy and quickly
Sure.
if somebody will show me something. So I've got a lot of practice at it, and glad to do it. To a certain point
Sure.
with people that need some help. So.
Man, I'm so glad your mom's proud of you, man. My mom's proud of me too.
Yeah, you read that resume in the beginning. Nobody cares except my mom, probably, right? My
So
wife
good.
doesn't care. I'm just
No,
joking. She's proud of
no.
me too.
JD, it's been an absolute pleasure, man. We are so glad to partner with you. Upkeep, I always give Upkeep a plug, man. Upkeep is doing a lot of strong things. They are hyper focused on customers, hyper focused on scaling, and the ambassador program is all part of that. And it's a breath of fresh air with Upkeep, where we say we have CMMS, we understand CMMS and what it is, but we're not industry experts all the time in everything, right? And we recognize how important it is to and how important and valuable it is to partner with people like yourselves and the other ambassadors that do know, because we can't know it all. And a customer coming to us for a technical aspect for the platform, we got you. But if they're coming to us and they're saying, I'm about to make the biggest pitch of my life for financial budget for some design change or maintenance program or whatever, it's like, okay, we need help with that. But there's people like yourself that do that on a day-to-day basis, and they understand the context. And that's real value. Having something is great, but having something and being propagated through the business and understood throughout the business at respectable levels is what you really want. And you're a testament to that.
And anytime you want to have me back to do something like how I do CMMS assessments, I know you'd have your own way, but how
Sure.
I assess them and communicate it, or business case evaluations in general, how we make business cases, and we can pick any topic, a PM program improvement, or hiring new staff, or
Yeah.
a PDM program. I can do a more detailed presentations if your audience want it, and give some tips, or you and I can partner together to go help somebody. So
They would they would
whatever
love that.
format you want, whatever format, in whatever role you need me to play in, I'll be glad to play it for you and your clients. Thank
We
you.
appreciate that. And on behalf of Upkeep, this has been JD and Bryan, the Pledge Pros podcast, unmatched value, unwavering support. JD, thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next one.